Luke was at cricket practice and it was allowed from the intervention order. It was a public place. I believed he was safe. It was just a little cricket practice.
Welcome or welcome back, and thanks for being here. I'm Cassie, and this is Wicked World. The story I have for you today is about a young boy who was viciously attacked and killed in public, all while he was just being a kid, playing his favorite sport. This is the story of Luke Batty. Luke Jeffrey Batty was born on June 20th, 2002 to his mother Rose Batty and his father Greg Anderson in New South Wales. He was an athletic boy and he loved playing cricket and football. He also loved bananas, SpongeBob, and the color yellow. When Luke's parents first met, they had both been working for a recruitment company, and Luke's mother Rosie quickly became enamored with his father Greg. She thought he was good-looking, tall, well-dressed, and well-spoken. The couple had an on-again, off-again relationship for a couple of years, before meeting up again 8 years later when things became more serious. Just weeks into the relationship this time, Rosie would become pregnant with Luke. It was from this point that Greg began to display increasingly guarded and aggressive behavior. He also sometimes spoke of hearing voices. But despite Rosie's concerns, she wanted things to work out with the man who was soon to be the father of her child. She herself had never even planned on having kids. After losing her own mother at a young age, she had feared losing more individuals that she cared about. There was one instance where the couple had an argument, and while Rosie was at work, Greg decided to cut up a pair of slippers that she had bought him. He then went out to the garden and took an axe to a garden bench that the couple had recently renovated together. Now, when Luke was born, his mother was staying at the Russian Orthodox monastery in New South Wales. His father, Greg, who wasn't even present for his birth, had also been banned from the monastery after he began making abusive phone calls to Rosie. But it wasn't long after that Rosie would once again return to Greg. And when she did, the father showed his new son tons of love, caring for him, feeding him, and bathing him. However, his anger towards Rosie still could not be contained. As Luke's mother was healing from her C-section, Greg assaulted her for the first time. She had ended the relationship after this, but still kept in close contact, wanting Luke to have his father in his life. But by the age of 2, Luke had witnessed multiple physical altercations between his parents, including a time where Greg had picked up one of Luke's toys and smashed it into the hand railing of the staircase, and threw a bit of it in the direction where Rosie was standing near Luke. Greg then went over to Rosie and pulled her by the hair and told her that if she ever stopped him from seeing his son, he would kill her and her animals. The next day, after this chilling statement was made, Rosie would go and file for a restraining order against Greg. But because his anger had never been directed towards Luke, he was allowed to continue to see his son. Eventually, the restraining order against Greg would run out, but Rosie didn't bother to renew it because his intimidating behavior had stopped. The mother and son would soon move to the town of Tayab when Luke was just 3.5 to be closer to Rosie's friends. When she ended a long-term relationship with another man in 2012 when Luke was still just 9, Greg swooped back into Rosie's life and tried to rekindle their relationship as well as bring the family back together. But when Rosie rejected him, Greg lost it. On May 16, 2012, police were called to Rosie's home after she said that Greg had threatened to hit her with a vase in front of their son Luke. He would be arrested the same day, but due to multiple delays, he wasn't formally charged until the following January, and the case never made it to court. This also resulted in a family violence intervention order being made against Greg. The father, who had had little to do with his son for years, had now re-entered Luke and Rosie's lives and began taking Rosie on a legal custody battle over their son. Meanwhile, Greg's mental health had seemed to further decline. He had been living out of his car for years and smoked marijuana daily. Rosie was positive that Greg had a mental illness at this point, though he was never officially diagnosed with one. According to her, his deluded behavior and paranoia had sabotaged every relationship that he had. Greg's life was failing, and Rosie believed that his son Luke was the only bright spot in his life. So she continued to allow him to see his son, since he'd always been a good father to Luke and had never even raised his voice at the boy. Then, on January 3rd, 2013, Greg broke into Rosie's apartment. He chased her around, assaulted her, then threatened to kill her. He would be arrested, and when he was granted bail, it was on strict conditions, including that he was banned from the suburb of Tayab, where Luke had been attending football training. When Greg had been arrested for this incident, he exhibited very entitled behavior and would tell police officers, "I only answer to Jesus. What makes you think you've got the right to hold me at all?" But again, Greg had never been physically or verbally abusive towards Luke, so Rosie continued to let her son see his father.
I tend to interview you in relation to making threats to kill and making threats to inflict serious injury and use unregistered motor vehicle. Before continuing, I must inform you do not have to say or do anything, but anything you say or do may be given in evidence. Do you understand that?
I do. So I don't wish to say anything. Matter's finished. I wish to leave.
Yep, that's your right. I'll just read you this right as well. I must also inform you of your rights. You have the right to communicate with or attempt to communicate with a friend or relative to inform that person of your whereabouts. You have the right to communicate with or attempt to communicate with a legal practitioner. If you are not a citizen or permanent resident of Australia, you have the right to communicate with or attempt to communicate with the consular office of the country of which you are a citizen. Do you understand these rights?
What right do you think you have to hold me for what?
I'll get to that.
What right you've got to have me here at all?
Do you understand the rights that have just been read to you?
I understand what you've read to me. I want to know why you think that you've got a right to hold me at all.
Okay. Do you wish to exercise any of these rights before the interview proceeds?
Well, the interview's finished. I said I do not wish to comment.
Okay.
You have nothing, there is nothing.
Yep.
So let's move on.
In fairness to yourself, I just need to get through these questions and then whatever you want to say after that, we can do that.
I said I don't wish to say anything, so how can there be questions and answers? You're now insulting my right of intelligence, right? And you're denying my right to legally represent myself by saying I do not wish to answer them. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?
No, I don't. I'm not denying you a right, that's why I'm asking.
You've denied me because I told you I do not wish to answer anything.
Yep.
That's right. Now you're going to ask me a list of questions.
Yep.
You've denied me the right.
Okay. So at this point in time, do you wish to exercise the right to call a lawyer or friend or relative?
No. I wish to leave. You have nothing, I wish to leave. You've arrested me before, it's gone through the court, you've had nothing. You've got the same person lying again.
Yep. All right, we'll just back up a bit. What's your age and date of birth?
You still have that information from before.
Yep.
It's on my driver's licence. You're asking me questions are there. And I said I would not ask questions, and you're still firing at me. You again have not exercised the right that you asked in the beginning that I could have.
Yep.
You're denying me my right by asking me my questions. Top hand, constable.
Okay.
In the name of Jesus Christ you are.
If I say to you your date of birth is the 3rd of November 1959, would you agree? The allegation is that on approximately 13:45 of the 3rd of the 1st 2013 Okay. I'm going to suspend the interview at this time due to no participation from the accused.
Then, in April of 2013, Luke would come home to tell his mother about a very disturbing conversation that he had had with his dad. The distraught boy said that Greg had been holding a knife while the two were in the car together, and he told his son it could all end with this. The incident rightly alarmed Luke's mother, and she was able to obtain a no-contact order. This, however, would not prevent Luke's father from attending his football and other sporting events, as it was agreed upon, even by Rosie, that there was less risk out in public. On February 12, 2014, Greg would show up to Luke's cricket practice.
He said to me in the car, you know, he wasn't very keen to go to cricket training, but it was the last training session before their last match. And, you know, being part of a team means You've got to support your team and go even if you don't feel like it. I dropped Luke off. He was concerned about seeing his dad because he didn't think his dad was very happy.
But when Greg did arrive, he seemed to be in a great mood, was relaxed, and Rosie was happy to see him participating in their son's training sessions.
I was running training. I was the only coach there. So I recall on the night seeing Greg and thinking, old man Batty's here. He's, he's rocked up to train. Quite sure I remember him bowling in the nets, and I hadn't seen him bowl a ball or throw a ball or do anything before, so I thought that was a good thing at the time.
Luke and his father had been practicing behind one of the nets. And towards the end of practice, when it was time to go home, Luke begged his mother for more time with Greg. The other children had already started to leave, and Luke didn't see his father often, so Rosie saw no problem with this request. Rosie went to do something on her phone while Greg and Luke were practicing behind the nets, when suddenly she heard a horrible noise. The mother immediately began to run towards her son, and when she got there, she saw Greg kneeling on the ground besides Luke, who was just lying there. At first, she thought that Greg had just bowled a ball too hard and accidentally hit Luke in the head with it. After Rosie saw her son lying there, she had tried to call for an ambulance, but for some reason, her call would not connect. So she frantically began to run and call for someone to contact emergency services. She still believed this was all a terrible accident and that Greg's anguish was because he had accidentally hurt his son. But when one of the coaches rushed over to offer aid, Greg said to him, "He's fine. He's in heaven now." The father had deliberately hit Luke in the head with a cricket bat, then proceeded to stab him in the neck with a knife. When officers arrived, Greg threatened them with a knife, and they tried to subdue him with pepper spray, but that didn't work. Ultimately, they would end up shooting him, and he would later die of his injuries. Greg had intentionally prevented paramedics from accessing his son Luke. And once they finally were able to access him, once Greg was shot, they pronounced the 11-year-old dead on the scene. Young children who had witnessed the ordeal would later tell police that they had seen Greg intentionally hitting Luke with the cricket bat, followed by him pulling out his knife and repeatedly stabbing him. It was determined that Luke had died from his massive head injuries.
An absolute tragedy occurred here tonight about 6:40 p.m. The police have arrived and they've been confronted by a male, about 50 years old, armed with a knife. They've attempted to use less than lethal force, foam. It's been unsuccessful. They have then discharged a firearm, shooting that male once in the chest. He's at the Alfred Hospital at the moment in a life-threatening condition. A further examination of the scene has revealed the body of a 12-year-old boy who's deceased, and at the moment we're still making inquiries in relation to the exact cause of that death. The male that the police shot was the father of the deceased boy.
There's people there.
Rosie?
I believed he was safe. I think it was a fair access. I think on the circumstances, I'm a victim like anybody else, that the court system and myself made decisions believing they were the best interests of Luke. I don't think anyone really understood or understands what somebody's able to do, and so as a sane person or as a caring parent, you trust that the very person that killed him loved him, and they did love him. They loved him more than anyone else. The only two people that love their son as much as anyone is their mother and father. And the very tragic thing about this is the father's life was tragic, and based on court appearances and other challenges in his life that we couldn't help him with, and neither could anybody else. He was on a path of desperate. No one loved Luke more than Greg, his father. No one loved Luke more than me. We both loved him. I did what I believe was in the best interests of Luke. And I'm comfortable with that. It was a tragic situation that no one could see was going to happen. I'm still dealing with disbelief.
Once Rosie came to terms with the fact that Greg had intentionally killed Luke, she said that she believed that Greg premeditated his son's death and chose to kill him, not because he truly disliked his son, but because it was a revenge tactic against her. She would say, "Can you imagine what that feels like? That someone against all odds wants to make you suffer for the rest of your life to win." Following Luke's death, it was discovered that Greg had recently threatened his roommate with cutting his head off. This had come after Greg was also arrested at the nearby library for looking at images of CP. On top of that, the father had once even threatened Luke's football coach, telling him, "I have a knife with your name on it." Greg also often heard voices, was obsessive about religion, often praying out loud, and would sometimes even have hallucinations. The father had even been in contact with the police just 3 weeks prior to Luke's death. But the officers who had spoken to him failed to execute warrants for his arrest because they didn't know about them at the time. And Luke's mother, Rosie, had never been made aware of the CP charges against Greg. She was also unaware of the death threat that Greg made against his roommate. At the time of Luke's murder, his father, Greg, was facing 11 criminal charges and was subject to 4 unexecuted arrest warrants. Rosie would say that she had considered calling police herself when she had seen Greg at Luke's cricket practice that night, knowing that he had a number of outstanding warrants for his arrest. But she decided not to, for Luke's sake, because she had done this on 2 prior occasions, and it had been very traumatic, stressful, and unpredictable for him. Greg had so successfully avoided arrest because he had been homeless for so much of the time. And when he learned that he had bench warrants for his arrest, Greg knew of a glitch in the legal system that meant that he no longer had to report to police for bail, which enabled him to avoid arrest. Following Luke's death, an inquest was held to determine what went wrong with the systems that were designed to protect him. But in the end, the inquest would find that no one person or agency could have been reasonably expected to foresee that Greg would be the perpetrator in his son's murder. Shortly after losing her son, Rosie bravely spoke to the media to talk about the reality of domestic violence in society, and she has been an ambassador ever since. She started the Luke Batty Foundation during the same month of the senseless loss of her son, and was awarded Australian of the Year in 2015. Rosie also said about Luke, "Luke was nearly as tall as me. He was sensitive. He enjoyed his footy. He enjoyed his cricket. He was effervescent. He was funny. He wasn't the best scholar, but he was intelligent, and he enjoyed school." She additionally said that Luke loved his father and felt pain because he knew that his dad was struggling. She continued, "He was a little boy in a growing body that felt pain and sadness and fear for his mum, and he always believed that he would be safe with his dad." Hundreds of people attended a candlelight vigil on the night of February 13th, 2014, at the sports ground where Luke died. Luke Batty's funeral was held on February 20th, 2014. Hundreds of his family members, friends, and schoolmates went to Flinders Christian Community College to pay their respects. His yellow coffin was adorned with bright flowers and a stuffed SpongeBob SquarePants toy. Well, thank you for listening to Luke's story today. I find it very hard to believe that there was not more that the systems could have done to protect Luke from his father. Just because he had never shown any anger or aggression towards Luke doesn't mean that he should have been around him. He was delusional, had threatened multiple people's lives, and police even knew that he was looking at inappropriate images of children, but they did nothing. Of course, Greg was the only one to blame in the end, but I absolutely think that more could have been done by police and by social services to protect Luke. What do you think? So if you like true crime and you want to hear it from me, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. And turn on those notifications too, so you'll know when I upload a new video, which is at least twice every single week. Thanks for watching A Wicked World today. Until next time, take care guys. Bye. Thank you to all the patrons of A Wicked World. Now, there's even more of A Wicked World on Patreon. So check it out at patreon.com/awickedworld or use the Patreon app. You'll have access to exclusive videos each month and more. Any support truly helps to make sure the victims never get forgotten and to highlight the shortcomings of society associated with each case. Do you have a suggestion for a case you'd like to see me cover? If so, send me an email at awickedworldtruecrime@gmail.com.